If you miss a property tax payment, the county can seize your home. That single fact forces a terrifying question. Do you actually own your house, or are you just renting it from the government for the rest of your life? For millions of retirees, that question isn't philosophical. It is a financial emergency. After 30 years of mortgage payments, after playing by the rules, after believing you had reached the finish line, you realize the race never ends. For seniors living on fixed incomes, there is no buffer. There is no overtime to work. There is no next raise. One medical emergency, one bad year of inflation, one spike in assessments, and the foundation of your retirement begins to crack. This is why people aren't leaving states like California loudly. They are leaving quietly. They are leaving after late-night conversations at the kitchen table, armed with spreadsheets, looking for a way out. And increasingly, they are looking toward 5 specific states that are doing something radical. They aren't just lowering property taxes. They are moving to eliminate them entirely. Welcome back to Tax Hack Pro. Today, we are exploring the 5 states leading the charge to abolish the property tax burden. We will look at the numbers, the legislation, and the reality of what zero property tax actually looks like. Let's begin. Number 1. North Dakota. If there is one bill that can take your home away even after you have paid off the mortgage, why aren't we talking about ending it? And if there is a place in America that is actually removing that risk, why aren't more people moving there? Imagine a couple in their early 70s. They live in the same house they bought in the 90s. The mortgage is long gone. They have no major debt. Their monthly income comes from Social Security and a small pension. It is enough to get by if everything stays the same, but nothing stays the same. Property tax bills creep up every year. Home insurance premiums rise faster than inflation. The cost of groceries, utilities, and healthcare stacks up. There is no single crisis that wipes them out. It is just a slow, unsettling feeling that the ground under their feet is shifting. That is the moment many older Americans are reaching. Not the moment they are forced to sell by a bank, but the moment they quietly ask themselves, if this keeps going for another 5 or 10 years, are we still in control? When you are living on a fixed income, you cannot earn your way out of unlimited tax increases. One bad year isn't just inconvenient, it can be the beginning of the end of your independence. In that context, North Dakota is doing something revolutionary. No noise, no empty slogans, no vague promises. Instead, it has something almost no other state has: real money and a clear plan to use it. For decades, North Dakota has been quietly building the Legacy Fund. This is a reserve created entirely from oil and gas revenue. Today, it holds more than $11 billion. More importantly, it generates hundreds of millions of dollars in earnings every single year without touching the principal. When Governor Kelly Armstrong took office in 2025, he didn't talk about property tax reform as a simple tax cut. He talked about ending a long-term threat to homeownership, especially for older Americans. His proposal, often called the path to zero, doesn't start with distant promises. It starts with numbers people can actually feel. The primary residence credit is being doubled, then boosted further using legacy fund earnings. This puts more than $1,500 back into homeowners' pockets right away, and that amount is designed to rise over time. But the real impact isn't in year one, it is in the trajectory. As the legacy fund continues to grow, the state covers more and more of the property tax burden each year. By 2027, the credit is expected to reach at least $2,000 per household. And from there, many homeowners move steadily towards paying zero. No new taxes, no cuts to public services, no shifting the burden to the next generation. This isn't just relief, it is a structural change in how government is funded. For retirees, that shift means far more than a few $1,000s a year. It is the move from uncertainty to predictability. When you know your home won't be threatened by unlimited tax increases, you breathe easier. You stop wondering whether a medical bill or a high inflation year could unravel everything. That sense of security is something many older Americans haven't felt in a long time. Waiting doesn't make this decision safer, it makes it harder. The older you get, the more complicated moving becomes. The more people recognize states with stable costs, the faster home prices rise there. Decisions made in 2025 or 2026 aren't just financial decisions. They are decisions about how much control you will have over the rest of your life. North Dakota is quietly becoming a place that checks the boxes retirees actually care about: a cost of living below the national average, home prices that aren't inflated by wild speculation, strong healthcare access in hubs like Fargo and Bismarck, a slower pace of life, stable communities, and most importantly, the feeling that you can age there without being pushed out by the system. Yes, North Dakota voters rejected a property tax elimination measure before, but that failure wasn't about desire. It was about trust. That previous plan had no funding and no roadmap. This one is different. The money is there. The mechanism is clear. And for the first time, eliminating property taxes isn't an ideological fantasy. It is a financial equation with an actual solution. If property tax elimination is ever going to work anywhere in America, it won't start in the loudest or most crowded states. It will start where there is enough discipline to do something difficult without breaking the system. For many Americans approaching retirement, North Dakota is no longer just a state on the map. It is becoming a serious answer to the question of where the American dream still exists, not as a luxury, but as security. Number 2, Ohio. For years, homeowners in Ohio believed the hardest part was behind them. The mortgage was paid off, the big debts were gone, the house stood there, familiar and steady. It was the place they expected to grow old without having to worry about much else. Then quietly, that sense of security began to crack. Not because of a major crisis, but because numbers started changing in ways they couldn't control. It began with a letter, not a warning, not a threat, just a reassessment notice. The kind of paperwork most people had learned to ignore. But this time when they opened it, they saw something different. On paper, their home had suddenly become far more expensive than it was the year before. No renovations. No changes to the neighborhood, just a recalculation and a higher tax bill that followed. For someone still working, that might mean tightening the budget. For someone living on a fixed income, it was the moment the ground started to shift. What is striking is that the first reaction wasn't anger. It was confusion, reading the notice twice, wondering if there had been a mistake. A quiet unease settled in as people realized the cost of staying in their own home was no longer fully under their control. Conversations started happening in kitchens and living rooms between people who had lived there for decades. No one talked about moving yet. They asked a simpler question. If this keeps going, can we really keep up? In Ohio, the issue isn't that people don't want to contribute to their communities. It is that they don't understand how staying put, once the safest option, has become riskier than leaving. Taxes rise faster than income, insurance follows, and for the first time, many homeowners realize they can do everything right and still be pushed into a corner, not because they failed, but because the system never stops demanding more. That quiet tension held until it couldn't anymore. There was no single political leader stepping forward, no major TV campaign, just ordinary people beginning to organize, talking to each other, and reaching the same conclusion. Waiting wasn't going to fix this. As trust in small adjustments eroded, thoughts turned to bigger changes, even ones that once felt unthinkable. The push to eliminate property taxes in Ohio didn't come from ambition or ideology. It came from feeling trapped, from the fear that if nothing changed, next year and the year after would offer fewer and fewer options. It wasn't about tearing the system down. It was about self-preservation from people who felt the system was no longer protecting them. And this is where the Ohio story reveals its limits. Anger can create momentum, but it doesn't create stability. Eliminating a tax without a clear answer to where the money will come from may feel liberating in the short term, but it opens a new kind of uncertainty over the long run. Ohio right now isn't just a potential solution. It is the warning, because when people are willing to accept major risk just to escape their current fear, it shows how far the problem has gone. Ohio doesn't tell us that eliminating property taxes is easy. It shows what happens when people no longer believe staying is the safe choice. And that is where the story has to move forward, because once the anger fades, what retirees actually need isn't a revolt. It is a path they can realistically walk, with real money, a real plan, and a promise that stability isn't just theoretical. That is when another state steps in, not with outrage, but with an answer to the hardest question Ohio is still struggling with. Who pays for that peace of mind? Number 3, Florida. Florida has always been where the American retirement dream goes to slow down. Warm mornings, no state income tax. Communities designed around golf carts instead of rush hour traffic. For decades, it was the place people moved to when they believed the hardest part of life was finally over. But here is the part that is changing. For many older homeowners, Florida no longer feels like the reward at the end of the road. It feels like another calculation they didn't plan for. The house may be paid off, the kids grown, the working years behind them. Yet the bills keep arriving, property taxes tied to rising home values, insurance premiums that jump without warning, fees and assessments that never quite go away. The dream doesn't collapse all at once, it frays. You can see it at the kitchen table, papers spread out, numbers circled. A quiet pause where someone realizes that even without a mortgage, staying put still comes with a price that keeps climbing. For retirees on fixed incomes, that realization lands hard. There is no promotion coming, no overtime, no second chance to rebuild. One bad year doesn't just hurt, it changes everything. That is why Florida has crossed into territory most states still won't touch. Not relief, not caps, not temporary fixes, elimination. The idea is simple. Once you own your home and live in it as your primary residence, you shouldn't spend the rest of your life paying rent to the government just to remain there. This isn't fringe talk anymore. It is happening out loud. Proposed constitutional amendments, bills moving through the legislature, public statements questioning whether property ownership actually means ownership at all if you can lose the title for missing a tax payment. Florida isn't whispering this conversation. It is putting it on the table and asking voters to decide what retirement security is supposed to mean. For older Americans, the appeal is obvious. Florida already offers what many retirees are searching for: no state income tax, a healthcare system built around aging populations, mild winters that reduce daily physical strain. Compared to many coastal states, housing can still be attainable, especially outside the most overheated markets. Florida feels in many ways like the version of America retirees were promised, a place to settle, not scramble. But property taxes don't just disappear without consequences. They fund the services people rely on every day but rarely think about until they are threatened: fire departments, police, roads, local infrastructure. Eliminating that revenue leaves a massive hole, and filling it without pushing the burden somewhere else is the hardest part of the equation. There is another complication few people talk about out loud. If Florida succeeds in cutting property taxes dramatically or eliminating them, demand won't slow down. It will accelerate. Home values could rise faster, not slower. For current homeowners, that looks like protection. For future retirees still hoping to buy, it could mean the door closes sooner than they expected. The policy meant to secure the dream for one generation may quietly raise the ladder behind them. So Florida stands at a crossroads that goes far beyond one state. On one side is dignity, the idea that retirement should come with stability, not permanent anxiety. On the other is the reality that systems must be funded and that every promise carries a price. That is why Florida matters so much in this conversation. If a state built around retirement can't find a way to protect homeowners without breaking the services that make life livable, then this problem doesn't belong to Florida alone. It belongs to the country. Number 4, Texas. For a long time, Texas felt like the answer people were searching for when staying put no longer made sense. No state income tax, a reputation for lower costs, and a housing market that seemed more forgiving than the places many were leaving behind. People packed up from California, New York, and the Midwest, believing they were finally stepping into something simpler, something more manageable. And for a while, it felt that way. Then reality arrived in the form of a property tax bill, not because the home was extravagant or the neighborhood suddenly changed, but because in Texas, property taxes carry the weight of the entire system. Schools, roads, emergency services, and local government are all funded through what your home is worth. And when values rise, the bill follows, whether your income does or not. For retirees and those close to retirement, that realization comes slowly, often after the boxes are unpacked and the first year has passed, when affordability starts to look different on paper than it did in theory. Texas didn't ignore the problem. That is part of what makes it different. Voters approved large homestead exemptions. Lawmakers expanded protections for seniors and disabled homeowners. The state committed tens of billions of dollars to easing the burden. These weren't symbolic gestures meant to quiet complaints. They were serious efforts that led to real savings for many households. For a time, it seemed like the pressure was finally being brought under control. But relief, no matter how large, has a ceiling. Even after record levels of tax cuts, the cycle never fully stops. Home values keep climbing. Assessments adjust, and the bill reappears each year, reminding homeowners that relief slows the problem without solving it. For people living on fixed incomes, that distinction matters more than politicians like to admit. Because stability isn't about paying less this year. It is about knowing what the next 10 years will look like. Texas still offers much of what retirees want. There is no state income tax. A wide range of housing options across urban and rural areas, strong medical systems in major cities like Houston and Dallas, and a cost of living that remains lower than many coastal states. For many, retirement in Texas can still work, especially with careful planning and realistic expectations. But Texas also exposes the limit of half measures. It shows that even massive investment in tax relief can leave people feeling like they are never quite finished paying for their home. That is why Texas occupies such an important place in this story. It is not the state where property taxes disappeared. It is the state where the illusion cracked, where people realize that escaping one tax doesn't mean escaping the system itself, and that as long as property taxes return every year, ownership will always feel conditional. Once that realization sets in, the conversation inevitably moves forward. Away from relief and toward a harder question that Texas itself has started to ask. If slowing the bill isn't enough, what would it take to finally end it? Number 5. Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania doesn't look like a place in crisis. In the fall, the hills turn gold. Stone farmhouses sit where they have stood for generations. Towns feel rooted, familiar, the kind of places where families expect to stay put for life. And for a long time, that is exactly what people believed would happen, until it didn't. In Pennsylvania, losing your home to property taxes isn't a rare headline or a cautionary tale. It happens quietly, year after year. Often without drama, without protests, without national attention. Thousands of homeowners don't lose their houses because they failed, or because they were reckless, or because they took on too much debt. They lost them because the tax bill kept coming, and eventually it crossed a line they couldn't step back over. For many older homeowners, the pattern is painfully familiar. The mortgage is long gone, the house is modest. Income comes in monthly, steady but fixed. At first, the property taxes feel manageable. Then, assessments rise. School taxes make up a large share of the bill, and there is no easy way around them. One increase doesn't break you. Two make you uncomfortable. Then something else happens. A health issue. A spouse passes away. A year where expenses rise faster than expected. Suddenly, what once felt stable feels fragile. What makes Pennsylvania different is how deeply property taxes are woven into everyday life. Nearly half of public school funding comes directly from them, one of the highest proportions in the country. That structure has been defended for decades with a simple argument. If you cut property taxes, you cut schools. And so the system stayed in place, even as it quietly pushed people out of homes they thought were secure. The result is something few people outside the state realize. Foreclosure in Pennsylvania often has less to do with mortgages and more to do with taxes. Homes passed down through families, paid off years ago, still end up lost. Not because the owners didn't plan, but because the system leaves little room for a bad year. The pressure doesn't explode, it accumulates. That is why the conversation in Pennsylvania has started to shift. Not toward relief programs or temporary credits, but toward elimination, at least for the portion of property taxes tied to schools. Lawmakers have begun openly acknowledging what many residents already know. Tying essential services entirely to property ownership creates a system where staying put becomes riskier with age. The proposed solution doesn't come without trade-offs. Replacing school property taxes means shifting funding elsewhere. Through broader-based taxes that spread the burden beyond homeowners alone, it is controversial, it is uncomfortable, and it forces a question Pennsylvania has avoided for a long time. Should the cost of educating a community fall so heavily on the people who simply want to remain in their homes? For retirees, that question isn't philosophical, it is personal. Pennsylvania offers many things older Americans value: a lower cost of living than many coastal states, established communities, access to healthcare in both urban and regional centers, a sense of place that doesn't disappear overnight. But those advantages fade when the ground under your feet never fully stops moving. Pennsylvania's story isn't about a sudden revolt or a dramatic policy shift. It is about accumulation. About what happens when pressure builds slowly enough that people adapt until they can't. It is a reminder that the risk of losing your home doesn't always come from big mistakes. Sometimes it comes from a system that never pauses, even when your life does. And that is why Pennsylvania belongs on this list. Not because it has found the cleanest solution or the easiest path forward, but because it shows what happens when property taxes stop being a number on paper and start becoming a countdown. When staying no longer feels safe, not because you did something wrong, but because time itself works against you. 5 states, 5 different paths, but they all point to the same question growing harder to ignore. How do you keep your home as you get older when costs refuse to slow down? For many American retirees, this isn't about policy debates or headlines anymore. It is a real decision about where they can live the rest of their lives with some sense of security. If this video made you start thinking about your own home, about whether staying still makes sense, hit like and subscribe to Tax Hack Pro. We track the laws so you can protect your assets. Leave a comment with the state you are living in, because the next changes we cover may hit closer to home than you expect. I'm the Tax Hack Pro. Protect your home, protect your future. I'll see you in the next one.